I looked out the bedroom window and there's a helicopter there with people coming out of the helicopter. And I'm like, this is a raid. We have no idea why they'd be raiding us.
Okay, so this video is about the push, I guess, in the freedom movement that's coming out by certain people claiming that there's an evolutionary shift in consciousness due to the planetary alignments, etc., versus what's actually really happening on the ground where the real evidence is. Also, does the planetary alignments, does that really affect the propensity for people to self-deceive when they are unaware of how self-deception happens? So stick around and let's see how that's working out.
And so the helicopter, and it comes right down and shines the light right into the windows and everything. And Pete's like, yeah, they know we're in here. Because, what do you say, they got thermal?
Yeah, they got thermal detection.
Yeah, they got thermal, yeah.
Okay, so I've picked these people that call themselves the corruption whistleblowers as the perfect test case of what's actually happening in reality in human consciousness. And then I'm going to contrast that with some of the people, or one person in this case, who pushes that narrative about there's a shift in consciousness due to the planetary alignments and all these wonderful things are coming.
But what's happening that's so beautiful is that the consciousness that's coming in now is so different than what was prior to it. It's allowing for a kind of opening and a heart-centered awareness that we didn't have before, much higher vibrational level. So we are now all throughout this cosmos. We're all being bathed in it. Those old systems of control, top-down, hidden, manipulative for their own gain, those types of structures and entities cannot last in this new energy. This isn't their energy.
Okay, so you heard what she said. That's what's supposedly meant to be in play. Now, it's about where in reality are you seeing that playing out? Right? And here's a perfect example of what's being said versus to how people actually are. So let's check it out.
The whole property was surrounded, so supposedly there was drones, we know there was choppers, there was numerous four-wheel drives that come around, and this is what they do. They came in full army gear. They came with all the helmets, all the bulletproof stuff, fully. The other person who was in the other area had all the red dots put on them, so that they had the infrared, when they're lining you up the scope. Yeah, he was covered in, I won't say his name, he was covered in scope dots, and they're like, come out, and he's like, I'm coming out. Like, we got nothing to hide, we got no weapons, we've just completely been disarmed because of Royal Registry, like I said, so they know the property's clean. So they've got this big military operation coming in on 4 people that are asleep going, hello, we just have to go and have to feed the chickens. You know, won't be a minute. And so Pete and I just get dressed, and I walked out, oars to combat. I said, I'm a protected civilian, oars to combat. And we just walked out to see, because we don't want to get, a hat show that we'll get shocked.
Yeah.
So we just walked out, hands on oars to combat, and just went over near the big tank thing that they had. They had brought in 2 tanks for us this time down in Adelaide. Down in Adelaide, we only got one because this is not our first rodeo. Of course, we've been bear-catted and pointed at guns before when we were in South Australia Common Law Court.
Yeah, it was completely ridiculous. It was totally, they would have spent, at an estimate. No, I would say roughly, just in my opinion, probably at least $500,000 on that raid. And they could have just come to the door. Like, it's just
smashed their bus window. They were. I must admit, when we went out and oars to combat last time, and then we were just talking to them. They were actually quite reasonable. Once we started talking to them, Peter's talking to them for like about 10 or 15 minutes, and in the end he goes, "Do you reckon you come over and be a sheriff?" This is to the sergeant of the guys, all their military guys, and he's like, yeah, as long as I can just jump out of helicopters. And I'm like, well, all our taxpayer money is paying for all of that, so that's fine. Let's just do it, so we're arresting the right kind of the wrong kind of people instead of terrorizing the civilians. We need to be going after really his bosses, and we did tell them when we're out the front with the Raptor team, your bosses, didn't we, love? Out the front with the Raptor team.
Yeah, but just go back to the guys who were securing the site in the military gear, but they had police on them. I went into a conversation with them, and surprisingly enough, the ones that were in our group were awake to a lot, and they were ready to jump ship. But I said to them, yeah, but you've been working for a foreign military occupation here. You'd have to do community service with that for that to potentially happen. But they didn't have mens rea because they don't really know. And so for those, even though in the Nuremberg trials, following orders didn't release them from what they criminally did, but however, we still do need all those tactical people that are good people. They were pretty good. They didn't bash us up. I actually thanked them and said, look, thanks for not bashing us up, because that's what usually happens. Even though if you don't resist, you get bashed up, you get gun butted, you get kicked in the head, you get all these things. Their foot on your throat or on your face or something. They didn't do that to us. They were quite good, but it was full overkill, like full waste of taxpayer money.
So if you didn't pick it, I'm going to go through it with you about the level of contradiction that is sublime. So here we go. First, she lays out the actual absolute terror of being raided by a military operation. Like, you got to imagine that's you and what's going to happen inside you because of that experience, right? And it's done deliberately at a particular hour for a reason. It's not just random. They do it specifically. So there's a particular kind of mindset that would willingly do that to somebody else, right? That's what's already set up. So they go from that to now starting to talk themselves out of that these individuals who put on these uniforms are actually someone who care about other people's dignity because they didn't get a beating. The only reason they didn't get a beating is because they weren't ordered to. That's it. No other reason. So now I'm going to move over to the male whistleblower when he talks about one of the sergeants saying, yeah, he's all in to jump ship because, you know, they're surprisingly awake to a lot and they're ready to jump ship. So as long as he gets to jump out of helicopters. Now, what does that tell you? Does it tell you he has remorse for how he actually treats innocent people? Did you hear anything about that? Or is it just something about the thrill of sort of high adrenaline action, regardless of who has to suffer? Just pay attention to that, right? Now, does the male whistleblower bring that up at all? Something worth thinking about. And then he goes on, the male whistleblower, to say something about, well, you know, you're part of a foreign military occupation. You're going to need to do community service. So he's already sentenced him of what would happen. Okay, so just bear that in mind, right? That it's not just easy, you just don't switch sides and forget about what you've done to innocent people. Then he goes to say they don't have mens rea. I've heard it said mens rea. Anyway, because they don't really know. So how do you make sense of saying they know what's going on, they're awake to a lot of things, and they're ready to jump ship, that they are actually part of making sure stay the way they are, because they're the ones who do the terrorizing for their masters? As if they were really awake, would they really be still doing what they're doing? Or would they be out there telling the truth, you know what I mean, about what they've done and seeking to actually make repair for that? What do you reckon is the more awake position, if there is such a thing? Now, how do you put that together with not having a guilty mind? Because that's what mens rea means. You know, how does he go about saying that, right? Unless he's doing some mental gymnastics. Now, another thing about mens rea that's not being covered here, and this is the part that I found really tragic, is that if you are an office holder, the genuine way to be an office holder is to take an oath. That means you are fully conscious, should I say, of the power that you hold that's been entrusted to you and how that power could be abused. And not only that, you are carrying a weapon, a lethal one, that can remove someone from this planet. Very, very serious. This isn't just, you know, oh yeah, I'll just carry a gun, you know, I'll just follow some orders. And as long as I follow orders and procedure, regardless of what my conscience knows to be true, that's what will protect me. That in itself is a guilty mind, because it's about knowing what behavior is harmful and what isn't, and then which one you choose regardless of the cover story that you place over it. Because the consequences don't change just because you put a mental cover story over it. I was just doing my job, doesn't change the consequences. Because if it could, they wouldn't carry all these deep-seated self-hatred about what they do to other people that they conceal. And they conceal it by all the alcohol, drugs, and all the other freaky behavior they get involved in that you don't see. Now, add to that the posts that keep showing up. I know I've been seeing a fair few about people who are former members of the police that left because of the deep violation they went through, where it was like an organized syndicate targeting them day in, day out, and they just endured it. Now, is that something that people who are, really there for your protection, is that something they would do to one another? Where there's like, if it's not outright terrorizing, then there's raping, especially the females, obviously they're the easiest targets. And then you've got bullying as well. So it's not just to the public they do it to one another. And sometimes it can even lead to murdering of their own, right? But then they'll pin it on someone else, for political expediency, right? That's what some of these people are willing to do. But the entire organization doesn't exist without each member being part of it. And then think about the domestic violence rates that those members perpetrate on their own families and never ever get taken to task for it. They're never made accountable. It just doesn't happen, because there'd be hardly anyone left if they did. So once you give people special privilege to do that which is unconscionable, you're going to get PTSD. It's not just because of the things they witness. They are part of those very crimes that they're called to address after the fact. Right? So there isn't really any deep investigation, because if there was, the whole thing would be eliminated, the whole structure. So it's just allowed to continue. And then at the end of it, you'll get people suiciding. Their conscience can't take it anymore. It's just too much. All that's someone who has a guilty mind. It's not just happened once. It's a consistent behavior they conduct. Every day they put that uniform on. That's what you sign up for when you want to be one of these people. So how someone who goes through being terrorized by them can turn around and say, oh, we need them, is just beyond belief. How is this conscious evolution? So one of the best ways to establish mens rea, especially with office holders, the gun carrying type in particular, is to actually ask them to their face, are you standing under the oath of constable, the common law oath of constable? And watch what they do. And when they don't answer, that's your mens rea. Because if they're not answering, that means they know what it is, what it actually means, and what they're imbued to do, and who they really are in reality that's in opposition to that. Because a true constable would answer that straight away. They wouldn't pause. They wouldn't be pretend they don't hear you or give you some alternative answer that's got nothing to do with the question. There's your mens rea right there. That's all he would have needed to do. But he didn't do that. He went with his fantasy. If you're not going to stand on principle and you're going to say, well, we need people like you, we need these tactical people. Why? Why do we need people who will follow orders of a master and sidestep their own conscience in order to follow those orders? What life-saving purpose does that serve, that we need that kind of individual? Please explain that. Unless you want more slavery, then absolutely. If you're someone who's claiming to be a corruption whistleblower, the suggestion is that you would like humanity to be liberated. Otherwise, you'd use a different title. So they're just some really blatant things to show how someone can actually lie to themselves. Really important to understand how easily it happens, especially when you start believing that there could be such a thing as a good person who's a terrorist, and that's their job. And that's what he basically said. Just because they didn't get a beating, then all of a sudden these are good people. That's part of the self-deceit. And I'm going to get into a bit more of that in a second. Now I want to give some clarity about how people become their own worst enemy through their emotions and not understanding how their mind makes narratives around relief. So when he said that they were really good to us, they never beat us, right? And all the things that he was aware of have happened when other people have been raided, that's to say a strong indicator anyway, that he was in absolute terror of that happening to him. And when it didn't, the relief was so profound that he started wanting to befriend them and speak to them like equals. So he started to be able to trust he was safe. They're really, really powerful ways to get people to start lying to themselves. And that's exactly what you just saw when he started opening his mouth and changing the narrative to suit that emotion of relief that comes from starting to believe you're safe. That's how the whole good cop, bad cop system works. And he fell for it. And so it's really, really critical to understand how you can lie to yourself through the emotions you're having in any given moment, especially when you believe that worst is going to happen to you. Because you want to make sense of that. Your need for meaning making is going to want to make sense of it. And it's going to make sense of it in the way that you relate to reality. So if you ultimately see the good in yourself, you're going to start looking for that in other people. And when I say good, I don't mean moralistically, I mean a level of behavior that you recognize in yourself. You're going to start putting that into someone else. You're going to project it into them. That's not who they are, because someone who would initiate violence doesn't mean they're not going to keep going. The only thing that's holding them back is the level of safety they believe they're in if they do it or if they don't do it. So that's all that's stopping them. But most people don't see it that way, and that's the tragedy of why we remain enslaved. So it's really important, that's why I'm going back on this, to get a real clear understanding how you manipulate yourself and how the masters of mankind know how that works, and they use it on you. And so this is what I'm seeing day to day in real life. So I don't know if you're seeing anything different, but that's all I'm seeing, is constant contradiction of people who are in a state of permanent confusion because what they want to be true overpowers what is true. And unless that changes, this whole slavery system that we're in is going to remain. People like this are part of it, whether they're doing it willfully, like, conscientiously, like are aware that that's what they're doing or not, it doesn't change the outcome. The most dangerous people are not the ones who know what they're doing. It's the ones who believe they're doing well, while in reality are working against what actually will help make change for everyone's well-being. Okay, so this video has taken far longer than I first anticipated when I started. So I'm going to cut it here. There's far more to cover about what was revealed in this actual interview, because it gets worse. And so I'm going to need to break it up into smaller videos. Otherwise, it's going to go for a couple of hours. In the meantime, I'm just going to point you to the Magna Carta 1215 website and this article in particular. There's plenty of other articles that expose the whole thing. So instead of Substack, here's another option for you if you're into reading and doing your own research. I highly recommend coming here and clicking and learning, and then sticking around and seeing what else on the site is there, because there is a lot more of how you can stand in your own power and actually start doing something that's going to contribute to the liberation of humanity. So I'm just going to leave it there. And also, just before I go, where do you sit? Do you see evidence of conscious evolution in human beings, especially within the so-called freedom movement? And if you do, I'd love you to comment and show me where it is and point to specifically who these people are so I can see it for myself.